Welcome, everyone. Happy ArtWorld Friendship Day. I'm Andy Bano, here on behalf of Spikeview. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Spikeview, we're a global platform designed to empower young people to own their narrative. It's the online hub where you're in complete control of your data. Art portfolios are an important part of the Spikeview platform. It's where creatives like you organize your projects, experiences, recommendations, all the things in one online hub. Spikeview's platform also helps emerging artists develop a network. That's how you connect with mentors, you get your work seen, and eventually sold. So today, we're putting our own spin on World Friendship Day by adding the arts focus. We want to help young artists make new friends. That means making connections with other teenage artists, professionals, instructors, art marketers, collectors, and curators. We have some fantastic company today, so you'll definitely be celebrating Art World Friendships long after the day ends. Now, before I introduce our first guest speaker, I want to point you to spikeview.com. Click or tap on Call for Artists. That's going to give you a chance to submit your portfolio for a chance at some amazing prizes. For starters, you're going to get access to deep dive question and answer sessions with the experts who can help you build momentum on your creative journey. And with that, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. Bill Deresiewicz is an award-winning essayist and critic. He's a frequent speaker at high schools and colleges. His work has appeared in a ton of impressive publications, including the New York Times, The Atlantic, Harper's, and the American Scholar. He taught English at Yale and Columbia before becoming a full-time writer in 2008. Bill's new book is called The Death of the Artist: How Creators Are Struggling to Survive in the Age of Billionaires and Big Tech. Now, I love these two endorsements for Bill's book. Best-selling author Julie Lithcott-Hames said, "It's a love letter to art itself and a rallying cry for those who produce art to stay alive." And Emmy winner Roseanne Cash called it the most refreshing wake-up call for young artists. Bill Deresiewicz, it's an honor to have you. The microphone is yours.
Andy, thanks for having me, and thank you, everyone, for joining today. Thanks for being an artist. Thanks for wanting to be an artist. It's a great thing to want to do. So let's talk about how young artists can thrive in a new digital economy. There's good news and bad news about being an artist today. First, the good news. The internet has opened up tons of new opportunities. All the things you used to be able to do before the internet, you can do much more easily online, or you can at least set them up online to do them in the real world, like selling your work, but also teaching classes, giving workshops, doing commercial work, doing client work, lots of other things too. And you can use digital tools to create your work in the first place. You can also find ways, including thinking up new ways, to be recognized by the gatekeepers, the galleries and art spaces and dealers and agents and publishers and critics. But more importantly, the internet allows you to circumvent the gatekeepers altogether by appealing directly to the audience. You can post your work on Instagram or YouTube or TikTok, whichever is appropriate for what you do. You can sell stuff over Etsy. You can self-publish your book on one of any more than a dozen platforms and so forth. More broadly, you can take control of your destiny, meaning you don't have, as people say, to ask permission anymore. You don't have to convince a gallery to show your work to be able to show your work. You don't need to get a publisher to publish your book to be able to publish your book. In other words, you can do it yourself. In fact, even if you do get an agent or a dealer or whatever the case is, taking the initiative and appealing directly to the audience is crucial now, because you don't want to be dependent on the agent or dealer to reach your audience. You want to have an audience that you can carry around with you wherever you go. This is one of the most crucial principles now for artists. The idea is that you build an audience and then you monetize it. So what does that mean? You build an audience mainly by putting your stuff online, on social media platforms like Instagram, but also by communicating directly with your audience, which can mean through a blog, or by having a podcast, or by being an active presence on Twitter. The key idea here is that you want to make a personal connection. You want to have people care not just about your work, but about you, which means that you have to tell them who you are. You have to be authentic. You have to tell your story. People want to feel like they're participating in your artistic journey, which can mean lots of different things. It can mean, for example, sharing process materials like sketches or drafts. It might mean having a live chat or an AMA, whatever. So that's the building part. The monetizing part means that you can sell things directly to your audience because, and I'll get back to this, you usually can't get people to pay you very much, often anything, for digital content. And I'm sure you understand this because you probably don't pay very much or anything for the digital content that you consume. So there are three basic categories of things that you can get people to pay for, things that aren't digital content. And the first thing is physical objects. For visual artists, that might mean unique physical objects like paintings or sculptures, but it also means what musicians call merch or merchandise. And in the case of visual artists, that means anything you can put an image on. Cards, mugs, pins, stickers. Also, various kinds of books like calendars or children's books, or if you do cartoons, comic books. The second category of things that can't be digitized is live experiences, usually in person, but now especially because of the pandemic and maybe after the pandemic, online experiences. Those tend to pay less. For musicians, that obviously means concerts, but for visual artists, there are also various kinds of live experiences like classes and workshops and residencies and talks. One big venue for a lot of this, for many kinds of artists, are fan conventions. There are more and more of these all the time, and they like to have lots and lots of creative people come in. And the third big way to monetize your audience is through crowdfunding sites. For artists, that usually means Kickstarter or Patreon or both. Basically, crowdfunding is a way to both build your audience and monetize it at the same time. Okay, so that's the good news. The bad news is that everybody else has heard all this as well. Everybody else knows this. There are literally millions of people who are trying to be artists of one kind or another now, precisely because the internet has lowered the barriers to entry. Also, partly because so many people are doing it, and partly because digital content tends to be cheap or free, everything pays much less than it used to, and a lot of things don't pay anything at all. And finally, because you can do it yourself, you have to do it all yourself. All the things that the gallery or publisher or agent would do. That means publicity and marketing, shipping and invoicing work, finding clients and buyers, chasing down payments, and so forth. It's like running a one-person small business. And so it also means things like thinking strategically, seeing new openings, conducting market research, diversifying your product lines and income streams, developing and managing your brand, and other things as well. There's an illustrator named Andy J. Miller who goes professionally by Andy J. Pizza. He's got a popular podcast for creatives. He also teaches classes. He said to me, a career in creativity requires enormous amounts of creativity. You need to think of crafting your career as the ultimate creative project. It's not going to just be break into editorial illustration and you're set. The watchwords now are nimble, savvy, and scrappy, meaning be agile, be shrewd, and be prepared to do what it takes. But necessity here is also opportunity. Artists now must, but also can, bring to their careers the same open-minded curiosity the same ability to envision unexpected possibilities that they bring to their art. One writer told me, the people who I see getting depressed are people who don't see a path other than the one they aspired to 20 years ago. If you can be flexible, you can do it, she said. So there's no such thing anymore as secluding yourself in your studio. You have to stay in constant contact with the market because things are constantly evolving, which means that you have to constantly evolve as well. Since you're doing, in essence, two jobs, manager as well as maker, you need to develop a second, very different set of skills on top of your artistic ones. I talked to a musician who had struggled for the first 10 years of his career, and he said, one day I realized it wasn't the music industry, it was me. I needed to adapt and I needed to understand business. So he read, as he said, probably 300 business books and books on personal development and books on networking. And one thing he learned is that, like any other business, you really do have to create something of objective value, something that other people are going to want to pay for. There's also another important principle about running this single-person small business of yours. You almost certainly won't be doing just one thing for one person, like selling paintings through a single gallery. Artists now typically, and the truth is this has been true of artists for a long time, typically make money from lots of different sources. As somebody put it to me, you stack up a bunch of small checks. It's not like having a job. And artists also typically make money in lots of different ways, not just from lots of different sources. Maybe you sell paintings, but you also do client work as an illustrator, teach classes at an art center or community college, have a part-time job that has nothing to do with art, and so forth. In fact, you want to make money in lots of different ways because you don't want to be vulnerable in case one of them dries up, just as you want to make money from lots of different sources because you don't want to be dependent on any single person or institution in case they go away or something happens to your relationship with them. It's important to understand, though, that everybody has their own unique mix. Everyone's going to do it differently, and it's not something you can really plan out in advance. I mean, to a certain extent, but it's always going to evolve. It's always going to adapt. And here's one more really important principle that it's important for young artists especially to know. Don't be afraid to ask for money. Don't be afraid to ask for more money if you think someone isn't paying you what you deserve. There's a lot of static in the arts around the issue of money. Artists aren't supposed to think about money. They're supposed to do it just for love. If you think about money, that supposedly makes you a sellout. Now, you are doing it for love, but that doesn't mean that you have to do it just for love any more than anybody else in the world. This is all a smokescreen. Everybody thinks about money in the arts and outside of the arts because everybody has to. In fact, there's a lot of money in the arts, as there is in every field, but in the arts, everybody pretends to ignore it, at least in public. Katrina Fry is a consultant, in effect, a career and life coach for artists of all kinds in the LA area and online everywhere. She also is a young photographer. Very savvy, very smart person. She told me that she tells her clients, stop BSing yourself. Don't pretend you're selling your soul by trying to make something commercial. Guess what? You already are making something commercial. And that's okay. Because the main victims of this conspiracy of pious make-believe are the artists, typically younger ones, who are too inexperienced to spot the hypocrisy. If artists are often naive about money, that's because they've been told not to think about it. If they are often helpless when it comes to managing their careers, that's because they've been instructed to regard career as a dirty word. The major thing Katrina Fry told me that she needs to teach her clients, who tend to be art school graduates and who often come to her still in their 20s, already jaded and burnt out from being shafted for so long, the main thing she tells them is lower the psychological barriers to earning your living as artists. Silence the inner voices. She says all this judgment about money and art, around how this money comes in and supports you as an artist, it's all fake, it's all made up. At the same time, while it's important to be able to operate within the market, it's also important not to be consumed by it. The way I put it is, be in the market, but not of the market. Meaning, don't start with what you think is going to sell. That really is selling out, selling your soul. Start with where you are and who you are, with what you want to make and need to make. Then bring that to the market without apologies, without shame, either for what you've made or for wanting money for what you've made. Find your way to the people who are going to give you money for it. Find your way to your audience, whether that means in the commercial world, a gallery or client, or in the nonprofit world, a foundation that might want to fund you, an art space that might want to show you, a university that might want to hire you. Okay, that's the first half of what I wanted to say to you. In the second half, I want to change gears and approach what it means to be an artist in a different way. This is what I call the life cycle, the general shape of an artist's career as it unfolds through time across their life, which is something I started to notice as I did the many interviews that went into my book. It's the artist, the shape of an artist's career is generally very different from other people in lots of different ways, other people's in lots of different ways. And I'm doing this now because you're near the beginning of this story, and I want to give you a sense of how things tend to go. But I'm going to start at the very beginning, because in many ways, as I said, the artist's life is different from other people's, including the very beginning. And since you've already been through the very beginning, this is probably something you're going to recognize. So by the beginning, I mean childhood and adolescence. One of the most striking things for me was the consistency with which the people I interviewed, and I interviewed a lot of people, told me that they always knew they wanted to be artists from a very young age, sometimes as early as 5. This is not normal for most people. This is not typical. You don't know that you want to be a lawyer when you're 5. But another striking thing was the fact that so few of them received any kind of support, especially psychological support, for that desire. In fact, on the contrary, I mean, we say that we value creativity in children, but you probably already know that actually young people who express a desire to be artists generally get a lot of resistance, relentless resistance, from parents, from peers, from their schools, from the general social environment. So back to Andy J. Miller, or Andy J. Pizza, who I said works a lot with young artists. And he said that he does that because of what he saw both in himself and his mother. His mother, he explained, is a creative person who, as he put it, has lived the tragic artist's life. She had all this potential, all these paths she could have taken, but the environment in which she was raised never gave her any real clear idea of what you could do with that type of talent. She also, he thinks, has undiagnosed ADHD, as he believes do a lot of creative people. And so she always tried to go in too many directions. As a child, he was often told that he was like her, meaning highly creative. But he said, by the time I was a teenager, I was watching her life unravel, and it was like a prophetic vision of my own future. And again, in high school, his peer group consisted of people like him and his mom, and a lot of them as well, individuals, he said, more talented than me, ended up crashing and burning. Later, though, when he started reading about figures like Steve Jobs, these extremely creative types who were idolized in the business world and who were supposedly 1 in a million, they reminded him of no one so much as his mother and his friends. He said, I kept thinking, these people are everywhere. You just don't have metrics to recognize their value. The problem, he believes, lies in the educational system, in the way that it identifies and nurtures aptitude. Creative IQ doesn't correlate with what we traditionally think of as regular intelligence or IQ, he told me. The hypercreative people are not necessarily showing up on the tests, meaning schools don't know how to identify them and don't know what to do with them. He said he described his own experience as being like a penguin in a pigeon's world. All the tests that I was given were like flying tests, math, sports, even his first part-time jobs. Couldn't do them. Everybody around me just seemed to be soaring with ease, he said, while he was bumbling around on the ground. Discovering design and illustration, he said, was like finding water for the first time. Penguins can fly just in water. So that's the first part of the life cycle, childhood and young adulthood all the way through college. Now the next part. You've run this gauntlet of discouragement and you still think you want to be an artist. You graduate from college or drop out or don't go, or you finish your MFA, and typically you move to a creative center to try to make it, to try to get your career going. New York, Chicago, LA, maybe a smaller center. The first thing that happens is that you go from hero to zero. I'm being honest with you because I want to help you. Hero to zero. In school, you may have been a star, or at least your teachers and your peers paid attention to you. Now you're in the big city and nobody cares. Now you're being compared not to the rest of the class, but to the rest of the world. The way forward at that point is to just embrace your awfulness and get on with it. One artist said, you have to be okay with being bad. Bad in public, bad repeatedly, and for a long time. Another talked about his first years after college. He's actually an independent filmmaker. He said, it was that period that anyone involved in the creative arts goes through in their early 20s. Anyone involved in the creative arts goes through in their early 20s, where they try to figure out who they are and what their work's actually about and what they want to do. You need to have time, he said, to grind it out creatively, which is really hard. It's really hard to do that. You have to put yourself through a lot of soul searching and self-hatred and self-loathing to develop, he said. The question at that point, once reality has punched you in the face, is whether you're going to go on, whether you're going to commit. This is a pivotal moment in the life of any artist. And one of the dilemmas in making that decision is that the early years of a future success can look an awful lot like those of a lifelong failure. Both involve obscurity, frustration, agonizing doubt. So how can you tell the difference? Well, one sign is that you're making at least a small amount of professional progress, however slow and incremental. Another is that you feel yourself with your newly realistic self-assessment getting better, however slowly. But maybe the most important kind of sign is the praise of a respected elder, even just a word of encouragement from an artist you admire. A one-line email, a referral to an editor or gallerist can be enough to keep you going for a long time. Now, eventually you get your big break and then you're set for life. Actually, I'm joking. That isn't how it works at all. Usually, you just keep doing your work. Work generates work. People like producers, agents, potential collaborators are always on the lookout for talent. So you make connections, you become better known. You still get a lot of rejections. Artists always get a lot of rejections throughout their entire life. But maybe someone takes a chance on you. With progress as slow, as uncertain, and as frequently unfair as it typically is, staying the course requires great tenacity and self-belief, as well, ideally, as a kind of serenity or acceptance. It's a matter, as one musician told me, of being a lifer, of knowing with instinctive clarity that this is what you should be doing with yourself. But most important in persisting is a sense of dedication to the work itself, for its own sake, rather than for any possible reward. One artist told me, it's about not expecting a lot. I think that a lot of young kids move to New York and they're hungry and they really want success and they want it to look a certain way and they almost start to feel entitled to it. And in my experience, sometimes the less you expect from something, the more you get from it. That's what she said. Nonetheless, and this is important to say, many artists reach a point of no return, where they feel the need to choose definitively whether to go on. This is another decision point. It's not the one in your early 20s. It tends to happen in your 30s. I heard about this over and over again. So you've served your apprenticeship, your 10 or 15 years. You've done the right things. You've maybe even had a few successes, but you haven't gotten the kind of traction that would make you feel like you're actually getting somewhere. I don't mean that you're a star, just that you're getting somewhere. And maybe you want to start a family. Maybe you already started a family. Maybe your friends are all doing better than you, your college friends or whatever, with jobs and kids and mortgages. If you're going to find an off-ramp, if you're going to go to that plan B that you've been thinking about, or start thinking about one, then now's the time. And look, there can be a tremendous shame involved in giving up, a sense of having failed yourself, of surrendering to conventional existence, of looking foolish in the eyes of the world, the eyes of the relatives who never believed in you, who always told you you were making a mistake, foolish for having presumed to try in the first place. There's also the dilemma of what economists call sunk costs, meaning that if you drop out now, then it seems like all those years are wasted. But dropping out is often precisely the right thing to do. Giving yourself permission not to be an artist can be as liberating and as brave as allowing yourself to try to be one in the first place. Now, of course, some artists do achieve success. And again, I don't mean blockbuster success. That's 1 in a million, just the success of doing it. But the most important thing to understand about artistic success, and again, this is different from other professions, because you don't just get a job and then just do your job, teacher, doctor, whatever. Artistic success always arrives with an expiration date. You have fans now. Your work is selling right now. The critics adore you for now. Artistic work is project to project. Your show can make a splash, but then it's back to square one. All of which explains the most remarkable fact about success in the arts, that for most artists, once they've reached a certain point in life, success is defined as just continuing to be an artist, simply having the ability to do your work full-time and on your own terms. So what kind of person signs up for all of this? What does it take to sustain a career in the arts? Here are some of the attributes that artists tend and need to have, in addition, of course, to talent: tenacity, toughness, resourcefulness, self-discipline, obsessive single-minded dedication, resilience in the face of rejection, a stomach for criticism, a tolerance for risk, a prodigious capacity for work, a willingness to do without. I came out of my interviews with such a tremendous level of admiration for the artists I talked to and for artists in general, because I always knew that artists were talented, and I also knew that they worked hard. I didn't know how hard, but all the qualities of character that I just named. And I would also add a great generosity, not just to their audience, but to other artists. So none of this is to say that you should shrink from doing this. I'm not trying to warn you not to try. In fact, if you feel called to do it, if you feel that this is who you are, then you owe it to yourself to take your shot. If you don't, you might well end up being bitter or angry at yourself or your parents later in life. I just want you to know that it's going to be hard. The road is going to be long, but don't let anybody make you feel like you don't have a right to do this. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. That is a lot to chew on. And as you know, teenagers have been creating SpikeView portfolios and submitting their work. One of the immediate perks they get for sharing their work is access to you, someone who's become quite familiar with today's art world and economy. So we're going to end this open portion of the broadcast here. And if you're watching after July 30th, you can still get access to the question and answer period. The link will be below in the comments. spikeview.com/arts-portal, but just click below. Right at the top of that website, you'll see the button to create a portfolio. That's how you get in. All right, now let's get to these questions that came in from teen artists.